Good evening and welcome. You're watching NDTV. I'm Vedant Agarwal. Well, what wonderful 3 days it has been for India with the successful G20 presidency, well, finally coming to an end. And these are live visuals that we are getting you from Bharat Mandapam, the center of all the G20 action, the center of India's diplomatic negotiations as the leader of the G20. And well, the Prime Minister is also expected to be at the Bharat Mandapam, to be at the International Media Center. He's also expected to address the nation after the successful G20 presidency. Of course, the adoption of the Delhi Declaration, with which India has become the country with an outcome document and a declaration which has a maximum number of outcomes, more than 70 outcomes. Of course, that has been a major success for India as a president of the G20. And as the Sherpa of the G20, Amitabh Kant himself has said, it's taken a lot of hard backdoor negotiations to actually get the Delhi Declaration to be adopted by world leaders. As he said, 200 hours of non-stop negotiations is what went into actually before the New Delhi Declaration was adopted by world leaders. And today as well, we saw that show of how world leaders were at the Rajghat, paying their tributes to the father of the nation, paying their tributes to Mahatma Gandhi. So that was in itself a very moving visual. The image of Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, also world leaders there at the Rajghat. So of course, India's bid has been to showcase Bharat to the world as the president of the G20. And of course, the Delhi Declaration itself has been a major milestone for India's foreign policy, given the fact that India was able to bring together various nations on the same page on various important issues. But these are live visuals that we're getting you from the Bharat Mandapam, the grand venue of the G20 summit, the Heads of State summit, which witnessed 20 heads of states, 20 heads of states and many delegates, over 2 lakh delegates from various countries, special invitees in one of the most grand and perhaps the largest G20 summit. The Prime Minister is expected to come to the Bharat Mandapam shortly and address the nation. Of course, he is expected to talk about a host of issues, including India's successful G20 presidency and how the Delhi Declaration is indeed a milestone. And well, as foreign policy experts had pointed out earlier as well, that Ukraine could be one of the sticking points and one of the hiccups as far as that New Delhi Declaration and that consensus is concerned. But India was able to get all the countries together on Ukraine as well. Of course, India condemned any forceful action, any use of force as far as Ukraine is concerned, and the use of force to grab territory. Those were the words that were included in that paragraph on Ukraine. But these are all the reactions that have come in from various world leaders in their various languages, talking about what they really think of the New Delhi Declaration and the inclusion of the paragraph on Ukraine and the consensus built over it.
Please allow me to thank Prime Minister Modi. Faithful to its principles, India did its utmost for its presidency of the G20 to serve unity and peace and send across a message of unity while Russia is still waging its war of aggression in Ukraine. In this context of the G20, I would like to commend the African Union for joining G20 as a full-fledged member. As you know, France was amongst the first ones to support this candidacy, and G20 confirms once again the isolation of Russia. A vast majority of the G20 members condemn the war in Ukraine.
For more than a year and a half, the Russian-Ukrainian war has been going on, costing the lives of hundreds of thousands of individuals, and we are investing tremendous efforts in order to stop that war once and for all. In the Grain Corridor process, we believe that any initiative that isolates Russia is bound to fail. Its success is of a very little possibility. We believe that any step that may escalate the tensions in the Black Sea should be avoided.
Not only is Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine criminal and unacceptable, and killing thousands of people, it's also creating energy and food insecurity around the world. This week, I continued to advocate for collective action to hold Putin accountable and to secure a just and durable peace that starts with Russia's immediate withdrawal from Ukraine. Canada will never recognize the results of the ongoing sham elections held by Russia in Ukraine. People like Putin mistake being reasonable for being weak. He is dead wrong. And Canada will continue to support Ukraine with whatever it takes for as long as it takes.
And thanks to this consolidated position taken by the Global South countries to uphold and protect their legitimate interests, have caused the West to be unable to Ukrainize the agenda to the detriment of the discussion of the tasks facing developing countries. They call it the Ukrainian paragraph. It is part of the consensus, but it's not about Ukraine. Yes, the Ukrainian crisis is mentioned, but only in the context of the need to settle all conflicts that exist in the world.
So, well, after a successful G20 presidency, Prime Minister Narendra Modi handed over the gavel to Brazilian President Lula da Silva, who praised India for giving voice to topics that are of interest to developing economies, emerging economies, and of course, for also being the voice of the global South.
मैं ब्राजील के राष्ट्रपति और मेरे मित्र
the president
लूला डी सिल्वा को
and
हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं
De Silva,
और मैं उनको
and now I
प्रेसिडेंसी का गेवल सौंपता हूं.
So 10 months after receiving the gavel from Indonesia, India has now handed over the baton to Brazil after a successful run at the G20 presidency. But one of the major economic takeaways from the New Delhi Declaration and the G20 summit was the India-Middle East-Europe corridor, something that's being seen as a diplomatic game changer as well. So this was unveiled on the sidelines of the G20 Heads of State Summit, and it aims to link Middle Eastern countries by railway and connect them to India by port, helping the flow of energy and trade from the Gulf to Europe. Now this is of course crucial diplomatically because this is being seen as an alternative to China's hegemony as far as road, belt and global infrastructure push of China is concerned. So here's how this economic corridor will function and its significance.
It's a big deal. This is a real big deal. And I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. One Earth, one family, one future. That's the focus of this G20 summit. And in many ways, it's also the focus of this partnership. We're focusing on regional infrastructure projects that deliver results across multiple countries and in multiple sectors. And today I'm proud to announce that we've finalized the historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor.
An ambitious and historic plan for a corridor linking Europe, the Middle East and India, announced on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Delhi.
This is a real big deal. And I want to thank
Even
you,
as China
Mr.
looked
Minister.
on,
One Earth,
the Europe,
one
Middle
family,
East,
one
India
future.
trade
That's
corridor
the
plan
focus
is a
of
part
this,
of a partnership
G20 summit.
for global infrastructure and investment. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden brought together 6 G20 leaders to accelerate investments into high-quality infrastructure projects and the development of economic corridors. So why is this corridor so important? To begin with, there will be 2 separate corridors, an East corridor connecting India to West Asia and a Northern corridor connecting West Asia to Europe. India, the United States, UAE, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, Italy and the European Union signed the MOU. India will be connected to Europe by a railway line and existing ports through the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Israel. This means faster and cheaper economic growth while incentivizing new investments and creating quality jobs. 2 continents will be connected to commercial hubs. Facilitating the development and export of clean energy is also a key aim of this project. as is ensuring food security and strengthening supply chains. Energy grids and telecommunication lines will be linked through undersea cables to expand reliable access to electricity. Developing infrastructure to enable the production and transport of green hydrogen is also on the cards. And they will connect people to secure and stable internet.
PGII के माध्यम से हम ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर गैप को कम करने में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान दे सकते हैं। फ्रेंड्स, भारत कनेक्टिविटी को क्षेत्रीय सीमाओं में नहीं मापता। सभी क्षेत्रों के साथ कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाना भारत की मुख्य प्राथमिकता है। हमारा मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी विभिन्न देशों के बीच आपसी व्यापारी नहीं, आपसी विश्वास भी बढ़ाने का स्रोत है।
Many are viewing this initiative as a counter to China's Belt and Road push on global infrastructure. With this partnership, Washington and the European Union are emerging as alternative partners and investors for developing countries.
This corridor is much more than just a railway or a cable. It is a green and digital bridge across continents and civilizations.
The efforts made by India to push Global South at the center of G20 presidency has been one of the top highlights of this global event. Remember, G20 evolved out of an economic crisis, and this shows a shift in the global outlook. From the launch of a transnational economic corridor to the inclusion of the African Union in G20 presidency, India is putting all efforts to ensure that developing countries are at the center of tomorrow's world. With Shrishti Shankar and camera person Pavan, this is Vasudha Venugopal for NDTV.